From We Are Spectacular, this is a Spectacular Marketing Podcast. A podcast about everything brand, marketing, digital and social for the food and drink industry and beyond. So today I tried really unsuccessfully to record this intro, many times in the street in Brighton, and it was Jubilee Street and I was sitting at Small Batch Coffee and then also at Carluccio's, and there was trucks and reversing bin lorries and noisy people and all the rest of it. I was just trying to capture some ambience and seagulls and all these kind of things, so failed miserably. So I'm recording this now in Platform 9, which is an amazing co-working space, which is kind of like WeWork or one of these things. And what I was hoping to do was paint a picture of the coffee scene down in Brighton and also talk about having an amazing cold brew from Small Batch Coffee, which I rather sneakily took across to Carluccio's as I was meeting someone for a meeting not long after. So absolutely fantastic. So what I was wanting to sort of link it through to was the episode today, which was with Anya Marco. And Anya is the queen of coffee. And anyone that knows her, if you cut her veins open, it would bleed drip coffee, I guess, or some sort of cold brew or Americano. So from someone that self-admittedly didn't like coffee at all when she first started out, has went through to being, coffee royalty and knowing everything about coffee and really being one of the trusted advisors, not only in the UK but worldwide, around the coffee market, the coffee process, everything to do with coffee from bean to cup to customers and beyond. I really hope you enjoy this episode. We had such fun. I've not seen her for quite a long time actually. And yeah, we just had a real lark just talking about one of my favourite subjects, apart from wine and music, which was coffee. So lots and lots of great stuff to hear. And I hope you really, really enjoy it. And yeah, we'll catch up after the episode. Today I'm in the presence of coffee knowledge royalty. So I'm with the queen of coffee.
Well, that's what they call me. I don't call myself the queen of coffee, but other people seem to like to use that terminology.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. So we're with the wonderful Anya Marco.
Hello.
So welcome.
Thank you. How exciting. I'm very happy to be here.
I know. Well, it's just joyous, So it's going to be an easy hour.
Oh, yeah.
Of just fun. This is not going to be long enough.
No.
For all of the things you always have to say.
Especially about the coffee market. And especially at the moment as well, with everything that's going on out on the high street. Yeah, there's lots to talk about. But hey, if people love this, I'll just come back.
Yeah, well, there's many opportunities to do that. And
right.
I think if you love coffee, if you're in the coffee industry, if you sell coffee in any way, shape or form, then this is the episode for you.
Totally.
So
absolutely.
It's all good. So what we're going to do is we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah, I can't even begin to count the years.
No, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I mean...
It's always the best relationships.
Precisely.
So it's all good.
Yeah.
But very briefly, I guess we're just going to whip through how the heck you get to be on the throne of coffee, built of Hessian sacks and beans.
How did I manage to bleed coffee, as they say, if you cut me? It's a very good question, and it's actually got a reasonably funny answer, I think, because originally, back in the day, and I'm saying, 25 years ago or so, and yes, I really am that old, I didn't like coffee. Oh. I know, it's a shock horror. I really genuinely didn't like coffee. And I left university at the grand old age of 26 because I went late and I needed to work. And I was running a theatre company and I needed to temp to try and, pay the bills while I was trying to, be a drama queen before coffee queen. And I got a job at Pret A Manager temping for Sinclair Beecham. And they were serious about their coffee at the time. This is back in 96, 97.
So what, 10 years old at that point?
Yeah, and another 15 or 20, yeah. And I managed to avoid the drinking of the coffee, but I somehow impressed Sinclair, and if he ever listens to this, hopefully that's what happened, to the point where he offered me a full-time job and created a role for me with the business, and I effectively was mentored by him for a good sort of 3 years before I then moved on in my journey. Still didn't like coffee, but loved Pret sandwiches, and still do to this day. But
What was putting you off coffee?
I think it was the fact that in the 70s when I grew up, coffee was just bad. It was, sorry, instant coffee companies, but it was instant coffee. It tasted like dirt. They just didn't taste nice. And my mum loved coffee. And I think I'm going to blame my mum for this, because she got me making her cups of coffee at a very young age. I earned my pocket money making her coffee. So there was that kind of, work-hate relationship with coffee. Yeah. But tea as well. And my parents and grandparents kept desperately wanting me to drink hot drinks for some reason at a young age. In that era, it was the thing to do rather than, fizzy pop or even just water or juices. But it just never stuck with me. Anyway, fast forward a few years, and I gathered lots of experience in various different roles and was offered a job at Starbucks, which made my then ex-husband, laugh with hysteria, because of course I don't like coffee, and I'm working for the biggest coffee company in the world, who had just been, landed in the UK a couple of years earlier. And every meeting started with a black coffee, and you had to drink the coffee at Starbucks. Oh, it was, absolutely the thing you had to do. So of course I took this job thinking, holy, what's this? What am I going to do? I don't like coffee. And me being me, I said, right, I'm just going to tackle this head on. And I started.
A new tongue?
Yeah. Take my tongue out, fill it with sugar. No, I actually asked them if they would let me go on training courses to learn how to make and taste coffee.
Smart move.
Because that's what they did. They did those for, staff. They did this black apron thing, and they still do. They called it Coffee Masters way before the London Coffee Festival had Coffee Masters. And I put myself through the Coffee Master training, and actually tasted real coffee for the first time, and suddenly realised that, oh my goodness, this stuff's really nice, and it doesn't taste like it used to in the 70s, and it isn't sort of brown water. It's actually got different flavours depending on where it's from, how it's roasted, how it's blended. I learned this whole kind of thing, and I became one of the 6 coffee masters for the company. Went over to Seattle, did a lot of coffee tastings at the roastery there, met farmers, met, the roasters, went through the whole thing, completely separate to my actual role for the company. But it was something that I just fell in love with it. And that was sort of the proper start of my journey in coffee, basically. So, yeah.
Great.
And then fast forward a bit more, and the last sort of 9 years up until sort of now, in fact, until sort of very, very recently, I worked with the leading coffee consultancy, Allegra Strategies, or they're now the Allegra World Coffee Portal, and was very heavily involved in working with their clients and on, actually creating the reports that have become those industry Bibles that, ironically, I used to read when I worked at Starbucks, and then suddenly I started writing them, that really investigated what's happening in the coffee market. And that's what I've been doing for the sort of last 9 years since then. So
fantastic.
Until now, yes.
And what's going on now?
So now I am a free queen. That sounded wrong, but anyway.
Pride in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, there we go. Yeah, I could get away with that. I've put the right lashes and makeup on.
There you go.
I could fool anyone. Yeah, I'm now an independent freelance consultant. Mainly because, in many ways, I'd like to be able to start helping smaller businesses. Rather than just sort of writing, something similar every year. I want to be able to sort of get out there and help businesses who don't necessarily have the budgets that big agencies demand, because big agencies have overheads and have all kinds of costs that need to be paid for, which is completely acceptable. But they're the sorts of things that the smaller businesses, and certainly where the 5th wave is going, and possibly even the 6th wave, which I'll mention later.
We can talk about that. All the waves.
Yeah. But so I want to be in a position where I can just help more businesses get to grips with what's happening out there, because it's not an isolating industry. And a lot of, in fact, nearly all businesses sit within their own bubbles. And unless you understand what the other bubbles are doing, you can get quite lost and can sometimes become complacent and sometimes fail. And I think it's really important for the industry as a whole to grow, for everybody to grow together and to have access where I think to date it's been less available.
Well, I think it's so lovely that you've said that, and I think it just makes me really happy inside, because we've had a few guests on the podcast lately where that's starting to become their thought too.
Yeah.
Where, I'm saying to them, look, why are you doing what you're doing, or why have you went out on your own, or, and it's them saying, I worked with the big agencies, and I just felt the little guys weren't, and the little guys and girls and whatever, weren't getting the support they deserved.
Yeah.
So I think if I had 10 of those instead of one big and then I could sort of do that.
Listen, I'll still help the big guys, but to the credit of Allegra, they did a lot of work to try and integrate the little guys into the industry through networking events and through ways in which they could help. But I'd like to just take it that one step further, and I want to be able to really sit down with people and not necessarily reliant on data or anything, but just on knowledge and experience, and help them think more strategically about their future and how they can grow sustainably and continue to work in influencing the industry in the way that they already do. So
it's absolutely joyous to work with someone that truly values your help.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Definitely.
Rather than going in and it's like,
a battle.
Yeah. Just a battle of egos. Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing about being agency bound, and, all credit to the big companies, but often they want to hear what they want to hear. And, as independent as you can be, having to say no to people is quite hard, especially when they're paying you a big whack. And I've often been in a situation where I've had to say, look, you know what, guys, if I do this the way you want me to do it, you're not going to learn anything. Yeah. I'm just going to reinforce what you want to hear, which isn't necessarily the truth. And unfortunately, that can happen in consumer insight, which is another reason why I wanted to move away from consumer insight as well, because as valuable as it is, and don't get me wrong, it's very valuable, it really always depends on how the questionnaires are written and interpreted. And often big companies just want to hear we're the favourite, we're the best, we're the most well-known, to reinforce some kind of blind vision that enables them to ignore the reality of the situation, that they might have to change something. And that can be quite soul destroying when you just want to get the industry right, and moving forward. So
it's so funny. Like I've been in my fair share of behind the mirror panel things, where everyone's getting takeaway and drinking wine, watching the focus group, and maybe the CEO's there, and there's a couple stick in my mind, and you've got the CEOs or whatever, and they're punching the air when someone says the one point that they said. And as they're running around the room with their top off, celebrating that point.
Goal. It's an own goal, isn't it?
They miss all the other, it's like you're laughing so hard at Jimmy Carr, you miss the other four jokes, So I think you're right. It can, customer insight sometimes can be so loaded.
It can be, especially focus groups. They're my least favourite because you've got 12 people in a room and you only need one strong personality and everybody just follows that person. And it's 12 people out of, 60 million. And you just think...
It's a busted flush, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not right. Yeah. So anyway...
Right, waves.
Waves. Oh, the
Tell
waves.
Me, you educated me so much on this.
Yeah, the waves are really interesting. I mean, I think the way to think of it, I always think, is from, who was doing what when. So if we think back to my childhood, the 70s, the ad, which you won't remember, obviously, Mark.
76.
Yeah, well, 70, so there we go. Yeah, we've had this discussion before. Yeah. So, on the television, there's Gareth Hunt having his love affair over coffee. And then fast forward a few years and suddenly he's making those sort of noises in the kitchen, pretending that coffee is being put through a terrible old drip machine. That was coffee. As I said, it was coffee I didn't like. Out of home, there wasn't really coffee. You could only really get coffee from a dodgy Italian deli that had it on the back burner for the entire day. It was stewed, it was grotty, and it was sold in a polystyrene cup. So polystyrene cups then, when you think about the whole argument over recycling now, polystyrene. And then in the sort of late 90s, there was this flourish of different types of ways of having lunch in London. Particularly, it was a very London-focused thing. Pret obviously opened up, and they put, Lavazza coffee in through old 1950s style coffee machines.
Was that the original coffee Pret used?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
That's
Back in the day, yeah. Well, when I was there anyway. And then... obviously, you then had the smaller coffee chains at the time. So Costa had 10 stores or so. Cafe Nero had 8 or 9 and was just being sold to Jerry Ford. All this was happening. And then Starbucks suddenly, this big behemoth from the States that had been around since the 70s themselves, came and bought Seattle's Coffee Company and opened about 20 odd stores in one fell swoop. And that was the second wave of coffee. This was the time when you had suddenly this terminology that people didn't really understand, but, a lot of middle UK rebelled against, I just want a cup of white coffee, please. But it was coffee out of home. And suddenly you had these branded cups on, the side of the street and on the tops of car roofs where people have forgotten them or going up the motorway. There's a very famous image of that. And it really just brought coffee out of home in a way that had never been really tasted before other than on holiday, with lots of milk, and this terminology like latte and cappuccino came about. Then we sort of had a bit of a recession, as I'm sure many of us who are listening to this will remember, and a lot of Antipodean bankers, and this is a huge generalisation because it wasn't just Antipodean bankers, but there were a lot of people.
Not Raymond slang.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely not. No, because they did a really good thing. They said, we're not going to work in the banks anymore. We're going to take our redundancy money and we're going to open an independent coffee shop. And that was the third wave. And what you have to understand about the third wave is that actually the second wave had done it all before. Starbucks started with hand crafting coffee. They had traditional machines. They didn't, push buttons. Costa have always maintained they have the, handmade coffee. And the only reason it became automated from Starbucks' perspective was speed, because all the complaints were about not getting served quickly enough. And, the demand was so high for this beverage every day on a regular basis that, they had to meet the needs of the customers. But what
Quick question. Does it matter?
No, and we can go on to that because I think automation is actually coming up leaps and bounds, and I'm going to postulate the sixth wave in this podcast. Actually,
Sorry,
I completely
don't want to steal your thunder.
Yeah, no. It's a secret at the end, everybody.
Okay,
Hold on, and I'll tell you what it is. So the third wave was really about bringing back that theatre to coffee and introducing the world to the flat white, which was then taken on thanks to some few words that I had with Starbucks and Allegra had with Costa about putting it on their menus, and it took on. Then you had sort of something called the fourth wave, which I actually said would happen when I was working at Starbucks. And it's this whole kind of bringing to the consumers awareness of how coffee gets into our cups from the bean. So bringing that awareness around the fact that, coffee is on a plant, it comes out of a cherry, the cherry has to be processed to get the bean out of it, the bean then has to be roasted or blended, and all of those things from the ground that it's grown in to where it's grown across the sort of, 23 degrees, either side of the equator, all of that will contribute to what that coffee will taste like in the cup at the end of the day. And it's kind of the scientific approach, that almost like, wine approach to coffee, and taking it a bit more further in terms of how it's brewed. But what happened with the fourth wave, it was slightly alienating. And those coffee shops that we would call fourth wave are the kinds of coffee shops that potentially your average Joe would feel a bit kind of awkward walking into, because it feels a little bit patronising and a little bit pretentious. And then what we saw was the third wave guys who hadn't quite, pushed that whole sort of pretentious side of coffee, but had realised that they needed to grow as a business if they were going to do anything with their lives, rather than just get up at 6 a.m. and serve coffee all day, every day. They started to expand, and they started to expand into little mini chains, and they started to do it with a real focus on, getting things right, being, making money became a good thing, not a bad thing. And we call that the fifth wave. So it's that kind of far more experiential but sustainable business growth that is based on great quality, using specialty graded coffee. So that's coffee that has, incredibly high quality in terms of how it's, checked by the people that do the checking, Q graders. So that's sort of where we're at now. We've got chains like Grind, like the Gentleman Baristas, like Notes, maybe even someone like Daisy Green, to a certain extent, Department of Coffee and Social Affairs, who are all displaying Caravan's another one, these sort of fifth wave elements to them. Yeah, and that's where we're at, and where we're going is I think still very, very interesting.
So going through then. Wave 3, is that kind of your all presses of the world and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Or sort of Flat White, Fernandez and Wells,
right.
Those kind of smaller, maybe 1 to 3 shops who just have a very nice corner kind of coffee shop that is local. And they're everywhere now. They're not just in London. I mean, I've just mentioned London ones, but, you can go anywhere in the UK now and see and find an artisan coffee shop. And it's the kind of coffee shop where you feel as though they care about the coffee, but they're not, they're not chainy. They're not too brandy, but they've got a recognisable look and feel. I mean, the only challenge with those guys is that it got to the point where there was it felt like there was this one big chain of independent coffee shops. They were all black and white. They all had wood furniture. They all had the copper cased, light bulbs. And that's where the fifth wave guys have kind of taken a step up and gone, no, hang on a minute. We want to be different to them. We want to be our own business. We want to have sustainable growth. We take things seriously. We only serve the best quality coffee, best quality food. We have our own kind of USP. So, with Grind, it's about having either a cocktail focus or a restaurant focus or each one will be slightly different, but each one will be equal in its quality. So there are still third wave coffee shops around, and I think what we think of as the third wave is those single to 2 shops. Anything that starts becoming 5 and is actually doing it really well, we would then bulk into that sort of fifth wave movement, if you like. Still early days though on that.
And then wave 4. Is that
Proof Rock?
I was going to say.
Proof Rock. I mean, they're lovely guys. They're lovely. And it's a lovely coffee shop for people who get coffee and who are super, super passionate about really understanding and being taught in quite a lot of detail about coffee. They're great. But, for someone who is trying to go from Costa to an independent, they may feel a little bit challenged by going into a Proof Rock or scared. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have its place in the market. No. It's just, there's not that many of them.
So on that point, it's kind of like that amazing McDonald's advert.
Well, I mean,
hopefully people have seen. We'll put it in the podcast notes anyway for people who haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's genius. I mean, there's 2 of them. And when the first one came out, I just laughed and laughed and laughed. I thought it was hilarious and I thought it was so well observed. But I think a lot of people who do take, because let's not beat about the bush. There are people in the industry who take themselves too seriously, and I think most of people I speak to anyway realise that. And then why not? You've got to take things seriously, haven't you? But those sort of people didn't like the advert. The rest of us said, do you know what? This is brilliant because it's done 2 things. It's mainstreamed the third and the fifth wave. Yeah. It's basically said to the general public, this is something that's happening out there, and we're actually slightly scared of it, so we're going to take the mick out of it in an advert in order to show you that you can have ordinary coffee at our place. And it's so clever in that respect, because what it's probably done for all those independent coffee shops is it's got people going, oh, I want to try coffee, like that. And they used real things as well. The deconstructed coffee they have with
It was the deconstructed coffees, the one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that was all over the place at the time. And you know what? Experiment with it. But I'm not sure if there is a coffee shop with a ping pong table as a coffee table. But I suspect there are coffee shops that have, engaging environments where you can do more than just sit and drink coffee, which is no bad thing. And I don't think I've ever been in a coffee shop where someone has stopped me from trying to pay because they want to sprinkle some goodness knows what onto the top of my coffee. But But yeah, I mean, it certainly highlighted that this movement is not a fad. It's a very definite, influential trend. And the flat white advert is fantastic because if you didn't know what a flat white was, you do now.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily described correctly by McDonald's, but, you now know that you can ask for a flat white anywhere.
Yeah.
And, of course, all the independents are like, thank goodness, we couldn't have afforded... None of those could have afforded that kind of advertising for their own product. So, yeah, they did the whole industry a huge favour.
That's showing the difference.
Yeah.
And then what about flat black?
Flat black. My nemesis.
Discuss.
So, I think this is where you have innovation taken a little bit too far in terms of this whole concept of and I'm for people who can't, obviously this is a podcast so you can't see me, but I'm doing that whole quotes
Rabbit
with fingers
ears
thing, so that democratization of coffee. You know what? I don't think coffee needs democratization. Sorry, big industry. I think coffee is routine. It's part of everybody's life anyway. And I don't think, you need to democratize the flat white because basically that's no different to saying you didn't have to democratise the latte or the cappuccino, so why on earth would you need to democratise the flat white? You just put it on the menu and let people order it. To my annoyance, the flat black actually tastes quite nice.
That's all right.
Yeah, I tasted it. I tasted it so that I wasn't, talking ill-informed, and so I didn't just sort of say, I think it's awful, because actually it's quite a good beverage. I think it's very clever in terms of increasing the ATV, increasing average ticket, because instead of asking for an Americano, or you wouldn't ask for a long black anyway in a Costa, but
why not? I've always wondered why
because
a long black isn't there.
There's a couple of things, and I think it's partly around the whole vernacular around coffee, because in the UK we don't really know what a long black is. It's another Antipodean beverage.
I want to ask for it to look cool, though.
Yeah, and actually, it's a better coffee, I think. And
is it okay to ask for milk with a long black?
Yeah, of course it is.
Because I feel a bit silly when
No. Well, then you're having an Americano with milk. It's no different. It's just that with a long black, the coffee should go in last, rather than what they tend to do with Americano is put the water in after the shot. And ideally they shouldn't do that with an Americano, and I'm sure far more experienced people with beverages than I will argue with me.
When I was there either.
No.
Always water first.
Yeah, and you should always do water first, but the long black is normally an extra shot. It's a slightly bigger drink. It's it is, for all intents and purposes, it is an Americano, really, but it just sounds better, I think.
I think it's as well.
than Americano. But what it does for Costa is it ups the spend. So when a customer says, "Can I have a black coffee?" or so what should be happening is when a customer says, "Can I have a black coffee?" they get served a flat black and they pay an extra 30p.
Yeah.
If they ask for an Americano, what should happen if the staff are trained correctly is they should be offered a flat black as being a better beverage, because the shot is extracted to a slightly different time.
And they were saying it was like sweeter?
It's only because of the way they're extracting the coffee.
Yeah.
There are arguments from the SCA that actually how they're extracting their coffee is not correct, and it would be an issue, but actually it does taste better, so they're not doing anything wrong with it. I think I guess the issue most of the industry have is just the vernacular of the flat white family and the flat black, and saying that the flat black is their invention. I mean, the point about the flat white is how the milk is foamed. So the flat bit, that term flat, relates to the milk. So therefore, you can't really have a flat black because it doesn't have any foamed milk in it. It's water.
But I'm sticking up for my brothers and sisters in marketing.
Yeah,
where you never let the truth get in the way of it.
Absolutely. Of course you don't.
Because someone's been punching the air going, "I've got it, lads."
Yeah. And guess what? I very much doubt the customers care.
No, what?
Some do, but I mean about the terminology in the way that the industry does.
What's the third? What is it, a flat mocha? Is that what they've done?
Well, see, that's a flat white with chocolate, but yeah, and that's actually perfectly acceptable. I mean, why not? And you can have a coconut flat white, and you can have a flat matcha if you want, and you can have a flat chai latte. Well, not flat chai latte, a flat white chai, or whatever you want to call it. But the flat black, it was just taking it to that one step further, where the industry, quite rightly said, "Hang on, guys, this isn't really. This is." an abomination of the term, because I want to say another word, but obviously I don't want to say that word.
You can say what you like.
Yeah, it's a bastardization basically of something that has a completely different meaning in terms of how the beverage is created.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. The beverage name describes the way it's created. A cappuccino is a cappuccino because it's got more foam and less milk. A latte is a latte because it's got more milk and less foam. A flat white is a flat white because it has, milk is more densely foamed in a slightly different way so that it's a shorter beverage. So you can't really use flat black. They would have been better to say long black, actually.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. But hey, they chose.
Maybe I'll get a job.
Maybe you could get a job in copywriting or something.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Right, let's go right out into the market then.
Yeah.
Just helicopter view and all that. What's going on out there?
Well, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, there are a lot of, businesses and chains out there that are posting negative like-for-like growth, or not growth, decline, who are struggling with footfall, who are, you've got food service that is, seeing closures and CVAs all over the place. You've got department stores, loved department stores, closing shops and closing altogether. So it's quite scary out there, I think, for businesses. And when I've spoken to various industry chiefs, the message has been very similar in that it's not an easy marketplace. And of course, the challenge we're having is that this is the first time for the coffee industry where this has taken place. During the recession, although it was scary out there, people just carried on drinking coffee. There was no real pullback as such. Yeah. And in fact, companies like Costa kept posting positive like-for-likes during, something that was really quite challenging elsewhere in the market. And so this is the first time where, as an industry, the coffee shop industry is saying, actually, it's a bit tougher out there than we thought, and we weren't expecting it. I think that's the issue, is that we're not in a recession. GDP is still in growth, albeit by 0.2% last quarter, so it is slower. But I think because you've got real consumer confidence concerns, people are not massively, but they are pulling back, and that is being doubled with much more competition out there on the high street, and that's the fifth wave and the third wave operators. And I think even in the regions, regardless of what has been said in the news about it not being an issue in the regions, actually there are independent coffee shops out there, and they are opening all over the place, and they are doing well in those sort of smaller towns, and that will hit the bigger chains more severely than actually in London, because in London you are somewhat cushioned by tourism, by sheer volume of people generally. But out in the sort of, the outer towns and the regional places, you don't have that same level of footfall. So when you're faced with dropping footfall and higher competition, it's tough. Having said that, there are businesses out there that are doing very well. You've got Greg's posting positive like-for-likes. Hotel Chocolat's just posted positive like-for-likes. That's a luxury brand, McDonald's in the UK doing fine, thank you very much. Pizza Express doing okay. So there are businesses, Pret, another one, who are actually... They're doing certain things differently, I think, than the ones that are possibly having problems with their like-for-likes. And it's around how they are being, authentic in their voice from a marketing perspective. Yeah. They're not getting themselves confused in what they should be doing. They're focusing on their, their raison d'etre, so to speak. So with Pret, they've always been about being passionate about their ingredients, passionate about their people, and that they've never wavered from that. And they've never stood there and gone, oh, look, there's a Greg's next door. Maybe we should have sausage rolls and pasties. And they've said, no, we're going to stick to our guns and we're going to go vegetarian. We're going to make the bigger company chase after us in terms of how they develop, And
even in Glasgow, right? So when I was there, that was my buddy shop.
Yeah.
Was the one
yeah.
just off
Mine
George
was Wimbledon.
Square.
Right, yeah.
And we were next to one of the busiest Greg's in Scotland, if not the country.
Yeah.
Tiny Greg's.
Yeah.
In Scotland, obviously. and Pret just never compromised.
No.
And Greg's was rammed, Pret was okay.
Yeah.
But, the guys just kept going. But what you started to see was maybe some people who were maybe slightly of a different demographic choosing to go to Pret and appreciating Pret for what it was bringing.
Yeah.
And then the Greggs crowd went to the Greggs and, you know, it sort of worked out.
I think that's what a business has to always understand, is that it must always understand its core demographic, and it must never try and chase after a demographic that isn't necessarily its demographic.
Yeah.
You know, like the millennials, these famous millennials that, you know, everybody seems to want to chase after. I'm probably a lone voice in this in terms of the consumer insight world, which is another reason why I probably don't do it so much. But, you know, I've been looking at consumers for 20 odd years. I think we're all millennials in terms of behaviour. Because I think that when I look at myself, when I look at my friends of my age, my peer group, the behaviour is not that different to a millennial. We all fear missing out. We've all got FOMO. We're all changing our approaches based on what the new trend is. We're all looking for experiences, not things. You know, we're all fascinated and highly interested in health and wellness. All these big trends that are attributed to millennials, actually, everyone up to about the age of 60, I would argue, has similar focuses in their lives. And I think what's happened with the generations is that they've kind of like crunched together, if you like. I mean, I'm using my hands to show what I mean, which is not very helpful on a podcast. But I think before, there used to be very definite demarcations between the demographics. You know, there was generation, you know, whatever it was, generation, I can't remember the generations now. Generation Y, Generation Z, Gen X, baby boomers. And they all had very definitive behavioural stances that didn't overlap very much.
You wore jeans, they wore slacks, whatever,
exactly. You know, your parents were very much different to you, all of that. And I think partly because I guess parents are much younger nowadays and older, in fact. So you haven't got
clinging onto youth.
Yeah, absolutely. But you haven't, you know, my mum was, 22 when she had me? That was the common age, right? Now you've got women in, you know, their 40s and 50s having children for the first time. But you've also got girls of 15, 16, 17 having children. So the range of parenting ages is much vaster. And the closeness between the generations, I think, is, you know, much more noted. And so therefore, you know, I can in my group of friends, I know of someone who's 10 years older than me, and I tell you what, he's more of a millennial than his own daughters are. You know, it's that real kind of ab-fab type of, you know, thing. So
I don't think you can pigeonhole it. I think it's an attitude to life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's that juxtaposition of it being, you know, the most talked about age group ever, but yet the most individual. You know, but you know, as you're saying, you know, across all the age groups, everyone's still watching Love Island.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly it. And I think actually, although my husband won't let me, damn it. Well, it's not that you won't let me. Let's not get that. Let's not get caught up.
I'm just watching it for Caroline Flack.
Of course, yes. Anyway. So I think the point is, though, is that demarcation isn't there.
I'm back in the room.
Yeah, back in the room. Stop thinking about lovely. I've met her. She's lovely.
She's really nice. Yeah.
I think it's about, like you say, I think what businesses should be doing is actually looking at their consumer demographic by attitude to life, not necessarily by age, and by behaviour, not age. So, you know, there is still a mass market in the UK. That mass market has millennials in it.
Yeah.
It has baby boomers in it. It has Gen X's in it. It has all of them in it. They all have a very similar kind of approach to life, which involves value for money for some. It involves luxury for others. But it's about understanding what those pockets are across a behavioural type rather than an age or you know, a demographic of that sort. And I think what's happening is that businesses that are doing well are recognising that, you know, Greggs will have people from Pret going into Greggs and Pret will have people from Greggs going into Pret, and that's okay. And actually that's good for the industry. And I think when you have businesses that are so concerned with what their competition is doing, that's where they start losing sight of themselves. And when you lose sight of yourself as a business, that's when you get into trouble. And I think that's what's happening to certain businesses out there in a very big, I mean, there's such a deep conversation. But that's the challenge at the moment, coupled with Brexit and all of those confidence issues and, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing as well is, you know, just in terms of the competition and all that, I think there's sometimes a certain amount of snobbery, you know. And, you know, I think I've talked about it on this before, but when, you know, we used to do a bit with Peter at CG and Peach and all that, and he really, like, sort of slapped it into me, and he was like, at Yo Sushi, your customers are going to McDonald's with a spoon. And I was like, what?
Yeah,
Not that I was discreet.
Yeah.
I mean, I like spoons and McD's as much as the next person.
Yeah.
But I was just like, oh, really?
Yeah. They're going everywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting. I was going to say amusing, I don't want to be patronising, but interesting. When you sit with some clients and they're like, my customers never go in, and you're like, I wouldn't bet on it.
But also, I think the concern that the challenge is not to get too concerned about that.
No, it's fine.
Because it's all about the mission, isn't it, at the end of the day? And when you get concerned about it, what happens is you become confused as a brand. And then, instead of going to you, because if you think about it, if you're confused about who you are, you're not displaying from a marketing perspective any kind of authenticity to the consumers. And so they don't know who you are.
No.
So they're going to go in 1 minute they're thinking, oh, this is the place where I can get, a really nice cup of coffee and a great panini. And then the next minute they're like, oh, hang on, I can get a sausage roll and but I can also get some nitro coffee. I don't get it. Yeah. So it's about having that, real focus on your true voice. And authenticity is probably the catchword that you might either be sick of or love as a marketeer. But I think that is really critical out there.
I think it's fine. I mean, it's funny, we were doing a 30s under 30 thing yesterday for the restaurant marketer and innovator thing. So I was like a coach sort of thing. So I guess I was the Sunita of the whole thing.
As long as you went
I wore the leaf dress.
Yeah, leaf dress. Nice. Yeah. Okay.
But we were talking about in the authenticity thing. Came up one of the judges. He might be the Louis Walsh, I don't know. But he got a bit like authenticity, and I was like, I don't, it's kind of like the word passionate.
Yeah.
You said about Pret.
Yeah.
It's overused, but Pret are, but they mean it, man, and they do it. So I think if you are authentic, then
there's no other way
totally
to describe
fine.
it. I think what we always, I don't know if we forget it or not, because I think we get blind or rather deaf to this, but all industries are about people, and people respond best to people. And I think if you try and engage with a person through product alone or through a facade that isn't real or has no personality behind it, or is just colour, or is just font, or is just a poster in a window, then you're not going to connect to them. Yeah. And the thing that, Pret does well, for instance, is you go into a Pret and you are immediately greeted and engaged with. You are immediately served well. And the food, it's all made by hand. The messaging is clever, so it makes you smile. All these little things, they don't just put pictures of, in fact, they never put pictures of their food or product in the window. What they do is they take the ingredients and turn them into clever little images, which are fantastic, because you look at it and go, oh yeah, that's a cockatoo made out of mango. How clever is that?
They spend money, you know yourself. They spend, that's getting done a year out, and shout out, to James there, and that leads the creative and the guys that they all work with and the whole team there, and it's so the amount of pain that everyone goes through. It doesn't just happen.
No, of course not. But it works.
Yeah,
and that's the thing, because there is as much pain that goes into creating the perfect shot of a flat white at the foreground with the perfectly crafted croissant in the background. It just doesn't have the same effect because everybody does it. So it's got to be about being different, and it's got to be about having your own voice and sticking to that.
Wallpaper.
Yeah, absolutely.
So who do you think's best on the high street? Who's nailing it right now?
I mean, that's a really challenging question, actually. I mean, we're going to go back to Pret. I think Pret have really got it in terms of the trends, in terms of diet, health and wellness with the vegetarian, and actually also the low carb and the high protein, although they still haven't quite, well no, they have got high fat products as well, because I'm little secret, I'm doing the ketosis lifestyle eating, and I went out today to find lunch, and the only place I could actually get anything other than Pret was Itsu, and that just shows how on it they are in terms of trends. Otherwise, you know what, I think he's doing a good job. they're a very much maligned business, actually, and it is Starbucks, and it's because they are very, very clever at recognizing where the influences are and then responding to those influences, but not across the entire estate. They will say, okay, we know we need to be better at really pushing the fifth wave, pushing quality, pushing, our single origin coffees that we spend an absolute fortune on and pay the farmer lots of money for, but never talk about it. So we're going to set up reserve stores and really highlight that. And they do that very, very well. Other than that, it really is back down to the independents, in my view. I actually, no, there's another two that I want to mention. Boston Tea Party, I think, are just fantastic. They're so clever, and they've taken such a risk with the recyclable cups. They've banned takeaway cups. Their sales of takeaway coffee's gone down by 24%. That's such a bold move to take in the commitment to saying, we're not just going to give this lip service. We're actually going to put our money where our mouth is, effectively. Okay. But also, the environment of a Boston Tea Party is just so cool. It's just so nice. And it's, they're a small chain. They're 20 odd stores, maybe fewer, maybe 15. They're all in the West Country, so sort of Bristol area. But they just get it right, and they can because they're small, and I get that. And the other one, to a certain degree, is Coffee Number One, although they haven't had a great year. But up until, say, last year, I think they were really getting it in terms of being a third wave chain. Not quite fifth wave, but in terms of being, super, super quality. But they do, they're one of the only ones that has specialty coffee on their menu. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting about them is that in some areas they are outselling on specialty than they are on the commercial grade coffee. So the bog standard espresso blend that they have in their cappuccinos, for instance, is being outsold by the single origin specialty graded coffee, which is much more expensive to buy, and therefore in cup is much more expensive. And in places like Bristol, that's really, outperforming. So it's just showing that consumers in areas where, coffee is appreciated will trade up for the right thing.
It's Coffee Number One Brains.
It was. Well, no, yes, sorry, it is. Yeah, they've done I think they're spinning it off at the moment. Right. They're still, but they're not having as close management on it. But yeah.
Cool. And then getting into reusable cups. So you've touched on that a bit. Anyone else you think doing that well? Do you think people are going to adopt it? What's going to happen?
The challenge with reusable cups, right, is that it's not the money. Okay, so it's not paying £1 for a cup, and it's not getting the 25p off or the 50p off
for a cup,
or however much it is. £15, whatever. It's not that. It's what the hell do you do with it when you've finished with it and it's got a bit of coffee in the bottom, and you're not allowed to throw it out in the street because you get fined. So you've got this, in London you do
water?
for spilling water on the ground. Apparently, well, someone's been fined before. I've seen that. But also, what do you do with this cup? You're walking, you're going shopping, right? And you want to stop and you want to grab a coffee, but you don't want to stay in the shop. You want to carry on shopping. But when you finish shopping, you've got bags, you've got this, that, and the other. You can't put a cup with liquid in it in a bag. So what do you do with it? So it's the actual reality of life, unfortunately. And I think the future, and Starbucks and McDonald's have recently got together. I think this is stateside, and they're working with the closed loop program to actually invest in recycled takeaway cups, so that don't disintegrate with the hot coffee, that can be recycled and can carry, because the whole issue is around, you've got hot liquid in a cup, right? You've got to be safe with that hot liquid. It can't be in material that will obviously melt in the hot coffee, which is why it's got that kind of plastic lining. So we're definitely going the right way forward. It's suddenly become very much central to the whole plastic thing. So it's not just the cups, it's everything. It's straws, it's, the whole cutlery, all of it has to be looked at. But it always takes a government kind of initiative to do this, unfortunately. But hey, it's been done and they will respond to it. It's just, it will just take time, because unfortunately, it's all very well for the government to say we need to reduce plastic, but then the government needs to invest in recycling places because there aren't enough in the country. So you can't blame the coffee shops for this. You know, this really isn't just about coffee shops or the food service operators. This is about the infrastructure in the UK, and that's a much bigger topic, which I probably know far less about than recycling gurus.
Okay, well, the audio equivalent of Photoshop will drop in some sort of
thing
voiceover
about,
that sounds clever.
Yeah.
And then non-dairy milks.
Non-dairy
What's
milks.
going on there?
So this is all part of health and wellness. So there is a wider health and wellness trend that has been going on for some time now, and it has become a lifestyle trend rather than being about losing weight or anything like that. I mean, I think the whole sort of body shaming thing is body shaming is not good. The whole sort of outlining of body shaming is a good thing, and that women and men alike should not feel like they have to lose weight. But what has happened is that everybody has realised that what we put into our bodies affects our health far more than ever before. And so there's a whole way of eating now that is responding to that rather than the weight loss thing. And non-dairy is part of that, because the problem with dairy is, for many people, it just doesn't agree with them. And obviously coffee is a very dairy-laden product in terms of the lattes and cappuccinos and the flat white and what have you. And the trend towards having coconut milk, almond milk, hazelnut milk, soya, rice milk, oat milk is going through the roof in terms of growth year on year. So it's
Oat
very
milk
much
is my jam.
Me too, but it's so high in carbohydrates I can't have it.
I don't have it very often, but
It's lovely, chocolate Oatly. Oh my goodness. I think it's probably in Tesco. Pete absolutely loves it.
Is it?
Definitely get chocolate Oatly. It's fantastic in with churned up with frozen cherries. You get ice cream without sugar, and it's just so delicious. Anywho, the challenge for coffee shops is operationally, because obviously if you have people wanting soy milk or coconut milk because they're lactose intolerant, you can't put that milk into the same wand as so you have to have separate wands. The wands I mean are the steaming ones, just to be clear for people who might not know what I'm talking about. And if you have automatic machines, then you probably have to have a bank of about 5 to fit all the different dairy milks. So businesses have to make really tight decisions on which ones they should have, which is why you'll find that some operators will only have a choice of 2, skimmed and normally soy, because that's the sort of the traditional. It's just simply because they can't put other milks through the machines in order to serve them. So it is challenging, but it's not going away anywhere anytime soon, for sure. Neither is health and wellness in general. In fact, it's just going to ramp it up a gear as more and more discoveries are made about how food impacts our health. And I think the next one is definitely going to be the whole carbohydrate thing. And that is going to be a big, big thing for food service, because so much food to go is carbohydrate based. Yeah. How on earth they're going to get around that, I don't know. I mean, they need to look at Itsu, because that's a really good way. They do it really well with the sort of zero noodles and Pret with the way they do salads. But, all these other operators that have pasta in every single salad or rice, they're going to have to start thinking about how, because that's not going to go away either. That's going to get more and more coverage, and it's going to become more mainstream, I think. So, it's all part of the same thing, really. Yeah.
Well, we were doing a photo shoot lately in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And there was a sign for a certain type of milk, and it was slightly obscured.
Okay.
And so when we got the photos back, we were like, now serving cat milk? And it was like oat milk, but just something was like obscuring the thing, and it was just like, cat milk? That sounds disgusting.
There's camel milk, isn't there?
Oh, God.
Yeah, there's camel milk out there.
I'm sure it would be fine. But, you're just like, I don't know.
I wouldn't like to be the person having to milk the cat, though.
Very
Crikey.
dry.
Yeah. Very scratched.
Yeah, very dry. But yeah, so it's just like, but yeah, and what about, so I'm real big fan of iced coffee at the moment, non-stop.
Yeah, obviously, heat wave, iced coffee. Iced coffee is probably one of the most fascinating growth products, I think. So if you think back in the day, if I talk, even first and even second wave, the whole idea of having cold coffee would have sent most people, running for the loo, because...
First experience of iced coffee, do you remember?
Mine was Starbucks. Yeah, in fact, it was before I worked for Starbucks, and it was my first, and this is what's great about iced coffee and frappuccinos in particular, is that they are entry level for coffee. So it was my first enjoyable coffee experience, and it was a frappuccino, and it was a raspberry. I remember it. It was a raspberry.
Was that like the Tazo tea thing? No,
this is way. This is
That's
in
my
like.
wife's
This is
favourite.
in like. Yeah, this is in about 2000 and no. When did I join Starbucks? It must have been 99 or 90. Well, anyway, it was before I joined Starbucks, and it was a sort of a raspberry mocha coffee thing. They've never done it since, but it was amazing. And it was cold, and it was slushy, and it was milky, and it was like an ice cream in a cup, but it wasn't ice cream, and it was So then when I started working at Starbucks, flashback to the beginning, if you've just joined this podcast, big revelation, I didn't like coffee when I first started in the industry. I would have iced coffee to kind of get my head around coffee. Obviously heavily laden with vanilla syrup or whatever syrups were there. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it more than the hot coffee, actually. And of course, now what you're getting to the point is, I am a massive, massive fan of nitro. I think it tastes really smooth. I think it brings out the flavours of the coffee. I love cold brew, but my absolute favourite is cold drip, which is a different process.
Yeah, that's good.
And it has it brings out the nuances of the coffee so well. And it's really interesting because we get cold drip at home because my husband makes they're called steampunk coffee machines, and he has his contraption in our cabin and very often puts coffee through the Hario drip. So I have bottles of cold drip just sort of, in the fridge, which is just delicious. Yeah. So I think, 2 years ago or so, everyone was kind of asking me, should we have cold brew? Should we have cold brew? Should we have cold brew? And I said, yes, you should. And then they put it on the menus, and then they were like, Anya, it's not selling. Now they're saying, thank you, Anya, it's selling. Because apart from the heat wave, it's one of those products that just takes that kind of, it's got a tiny hurdle over it, which is, I don't know if I want coffee, cold black coffee. Cold milky coffee is like having a coffee milkshake, and there's much easier entry point to that, which is why all those RTD, those ready to drink coffees like Jimmy's and the Starbucks ones do okay, because it's it's like having chocolate oatly milk, it's coffee milk, but the cold brew took a bit of adjustment, and I wouldn't necessarily say that if you went to Abergavenny it would be hugely popular, but I think in the towns where coffee has a real scene, like Bristol and London and Manchester, etc., they're doing really well. And Brighton, obviously, how could I forget Brighton? I'm just addicted to Bristol because we want to move there at some point, but so there's definitely a growth, and it will continue to and I think this heat wave's just going to actually really benefit the beverage, and nitro as well.
It's quite fun because it's sort of my go-to for a while, and then you're out with people and then they order a hot one, and then yours come and they go, oh damn it, you feel like you're helping convert
absolutely
people.
Pete's funny because he's not a fan of nitro. He's
Pete's Mr. Anya.
Pete, Mr. Anya. Missy's gonna love that when he hears this. He's not a fan of nitro, but he does love his cold drip, obviously, because he makes it. But I had a nitro in Crosstown, I think it was, or it might have been a cold brew, and he got a hot coffee, and he did exactly that thing. He tried it and he went, oh, actually, this is really nice, and now I wish I'd had this instead. So
I had some disgusting ones, right enough.
Of course, you're gonna, because again, it's like anything. There's also disgusting coffee out there, isn't it? Because it's either poor quality or it's not been made right, or So, and it's an art making cold brew and cold drip. It's a whole beverage. It takes a lot of time. Cold brew generally needs to sort of brew in the water for 14 odd hours. The steampunk coffee machine that Pete makes, his cold drip takes 14 hours to make a litre of coffee. So it's not going to be cheap, and it can go wrong. But, when you get a good one, wow, it's just amazing. I love it. It's my favourite way of having coffee, actually.
And what about restaurants then, being able to do good coffee?
This is probably one of the hardest areas, and it's interesting because I have had some conversations recently with restaurateurs, and I think the challenge is very much, again, back to operationally, and you have to remember that when you're in a restaurant, it isn't all smooth and easy, right? You go in, you get served by ostensibly a waiter or a waitress. They're not necessarily trained to be a barista, right? So they're already having quite stressful lives being waiters and waitresses. It's not an easy job. I've done it. And, you know, you've got the heat of the chefs in the kitchen and all the swearing that goes on behind there. You've got the stress of making sure you serve people on time with the right food. To then add an extra skill on top of that can be quite a challenge for restaurateurs, especially the casual chains where they don't necessarily, they pay the right amount of money, but it's not, you know, a massive salary, let's face it. And it's also often transient workers. So very few people make a career out of being a waiter and waitress in somewhere like, you know, Pizza Express or, Carluccio's or, you know, Zizi or all of those sort of Italian places where you would expect to get great coffee. Yep. So for them to invest in the coffee is a challenge because they're not necessarily going to see the reward of that. Even though back in the day in the first wave, the only time that people ever had coffee was after dinner. Yeah. Now it's reversed. You know, people have coffee at breakfast and in the sort of lunchtime period, and they tend to switch out of coffee for the evening because there's that whole fear around being wired for the rest of the night. Unless you're me, I can drink coffee all day long.
And there's the Michael McIntyre sketch about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's probably true for a lot of people. So I think that for restaurants, it's a real kind of, you know, nice to have rather than must have, which is a shame because I think that, you know, for many consumers, there is an expectation when you're out of home, you can have the same quality coffee anywhere you go, and you shouldn't have to go to a coffee shop if you're out for a meal. You should be able to get a great coffee. So what they tend to do is they either do a really good thing like Pizza Express and they get a great coffee roaster behind them and have that roaster help them with the training. And
can you say who's doing that?
I probably can't.
Okay,
yeah,
fine.
but they're one of the good ones out there. Up in Scotland.
That's fine.
Yeah. So
don't look over there.
Yeah, don't look over there. Yeah. So the whole but the whole way they're supported, and that's really important as a roaster. Supporting your clients is massively important in helping them overcome those hurdles of how on earth do we get our staff to understand how to make a great coffee. And then other restaurants do things like have Nespresso machines because partly the throughput isn't high enough to invest in a big machine, and secondly, it kind of makes it easier for them. It still delivers a reasonably good cup of coffee. In fact, quite a good cup of coffee, actually. And, you know, you can still have the word cappuccino and latte on the menu, and you can still charge the £2.50, 60, 70, 80, £3. The other two places that it's a challenge, I think, as well, is hotels and pubs. And again, I think with pubs, it's about the way pubs are structured. Yeah. Because so many pubs, with the exception of the Wetherspoons, I suppose, and some other chain pubs, are, manager owned. You have to get that manager to be passionate about the coffee. Yeah. So to get a consistent delivery of coffee across pub groups
it's a culture thing.
Oh, yeah. And it's that, why should I invest 10 grand or even 5 grand in a machine when I'm going to get more profit from a beer pump? You know, it's that education around, and because people aren't asking for coffee in pubs because coffee isn't there. It's that chicken and egg scenario.
Got a quick story about pubs.
Oh yeah, no,
coffee.
Yeah, go for
good
it.
One. Okay, good
yeah,
one.
yeah.
So we went to a roaster in Scotland.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I better not say who actually. So anyway, so we had the privilege of working with Fuller's on Brewer Street.
Right.
Coffee.
Yes.
And like the name existed and all that, so we kind of picked up a brand they had sort of line about. It was it was doing okay, but you know, so we sort of took it and rebooted it. So it was this wonderful thing where we re-looked at it and where I thought. So we got George, who is the sort of head brewer, main person now at Fuller's, and she does all the brewing at like London Pride, and it's just amazing that it's, you know, a lady and it's fantastic and she's just so talented and all that. So we got her, and then the head roaster at the roastery was a lady as well, fabulous Portuguese lady. So got them together, and then we had this idea where we're like, well, what if we took the tasting profile of London Pride and mirrored that to your coffee?
That'd be fantastic.
And that's what we did.
Oh, so that's such a good idea.
Took everyone up to Scotland.
Yeah.
And we went through all this tasting and cupping and da-da-da. And we tasted a few variants of, that was kind of roughly in the ball. So malty, toast, da-da-da-da-da. And and we came up with the new way.
I mean, that's a fantastic approach to it. And actually,
brilliant.
I have a lot of respect for Fuller's. I know the guy there.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Nick, I think it is. Nick. It's Nick.
That's amazing.
I know so many people that sometimes names come out of my head.
It was Nick's brainchild.
And he
rebooted the whole
that's
thing.
it. You just need to have one person who's passionate about coffee and who can actually see it and say, this brewery can take this and it can create something that our managers and our pub owners and our leaseholders and our, chain pubs, because so many groups have so many different levels as well, and get on board with this. And I think if you have that one person, I know, for instance, at Intercontinental Group, they have someone who's very passionate about coffee at the head of that, and he does so much for really saying, okay, at this hotel, that kind of coffee's wrong, but this kind of coffee's right. And actually being able to segment. So I think that's the key actually in non-coffee focused operations, is to really segment, especially the bigger groups like hotels and pubs and restaurant groups as well, is to segment your coffee offer along the lines of your brand. And also not to feel under pressure to have a brand in your place as either. Be bold with going white label and having your own coffee, because I think that gives, it helps with your own branding, and I think it also helps you with price. It does so much, and there are so many roasters out there that will work with you on that. Well,
this was a conversation we had where it was like, look, don't go off the shelf. You deserve to have your own blend,
coffee. Absolutely,
and your own brand, and
and it's moving
and
that
he pushed
way.
it through.
That's good. That's good to hear.
And what is it, black gold?
Nice one.
So that was just fabulous. So it's strength to strength, which is
absolutely
good. So then a couple of other things I was thinking about was coffee at home. Then, so you were talking earlier on about the plucking in the kitchen. So the pods and all this. So I've done something dodgy with the pods where there's a phrase.
To hear this?
Well, so there's the story of buy cheap, buy twice.
Oh yeah.
So I went on Amazon and I bought the fake pods. And my machine basically just sort of jammed and blew up and is a mess. And I keep trying and it keeps doing the same thing. So advice to anyone is just buy the official pods.
Or pods, because now obviously, particularly with Nespresso, there are now companies that have the rights to produce pods that are compatible with Nespresso and therefore aren't the cheap fake ones. You were buying the cheeky ones, yeah. No, I mean the pods have been a phenomenal success for at home, and it's what's really interesting, I think, about drinking coffee at home is that now what's happening is consumers are actually looking at what they have out of home and saying, I want that at home, rather than the other way around. Many, I've just talked about the health and wellness trend as impacting on food, and what you have at home, you want to have out of home. Well, with coffee, it's the other way around. People don't want what they have at home out of home, otherwise they wouldn't. Tea is the reverse, because tea is so specific in Britain about how each person has their tea differently. I know a friend who doesn't even, I think she just waves the tea bag over the cup. She literally shows it. It might get dunked in for about a second. And then that's it. Whereas I have to, leave my tea bag in for about 3 years. Stamp it in, screw it down.
14 hours.
And exactly. Hot brew tea, cold drip tea. But when you're in a coffee shop, you don't have that luxury of making the tea yourself. So, but the reverse is true of coffee, because obviously coffee was, we've been educated about coffee through the out-of-home market. So now at home, we are looking for a similar experience. We can't have the lovely sitting at a table, people watching, being on our laptops, chatting to friends, reading books kind of experience. But we can at least, when we wake up, have something similar to the coffee that we have on the way to work or while we're shopping and what have you. And we can do that through the sort of the Tassimos, the Senseos and the Nespressos, and that's why they're so popular. And I think what else is really telling is that the instant coffee companies are now going, oh God, we've got competition that we didn't ever expect to have here. And so they're creating the sort of the barista style instant coffee. And then on the flip side, you've then got the roasters out there saying, well, okay, if Nespresso and Tassimo and Sinclair are doing so well, we're going to make even better quality pods. So the whole, it's only good for us as the consumer because the quality just goes up and up. Well, you see, then you've got the roasters who are doing recyclable pods.
Right.
And that will come.
Are they available in Hookie?
I don't think so, unless you know. I think Max's might be compostable.
Okay.
Max Kloner-Dashwood of Kloner and Spools. So it might be worth having a little chat with him, see if we can do a bit of a. Yeah,
I don't know. Small batch. At the end of my road.
Yeah. Small batch. Yeah, small batch. They might do it. So and then they're also coming up with high quality instant coffee by taking Arabica specialty coffee, freeze driving it. I can't say the word.
Freeze drying.
Thank you. There's Spoonerism there.
My English is better than yours.
Yeah, I know. It's terrible. I'm tripping over my own tongue. It's these big lips. And turning it into instant coffee, which is, so that's all happening. And then the other thing to say about that is the growth of whole bean and the ability to make coffee so many different ways. We're becoming more educated. Yeah. It's so easy to do a pour over. So to have a bit of a filter in a little, draining thing above your cup and put the coffee in, put the water in, you've got a great cup of coffee. And actually the price differential between whole bean and a pot of blimmin', instant coffee, I won't name a brand, is not that far removed. And so the affordability, it's still expensive to have coffee. Back in the day when I hated coffee, my ex would always try and buy jars of coffee and I'd be like, I'm not paying £8 for a jar of coffee. Yeah. Now, of course, I'm like, oh God, is it only £8 for a bag of coffee? Great, I'll buy it. Yeah, exactly. So it's much more affordable and easy. You still can't get the same experience, but it's getting better at home for sure.
So,
and there's more variety as well. Sorry.
A couple of personal questions which will help me.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm never sure in a cafeteria how many tablespoons to put in.
5.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is that not too much?
No.
Heaped? Big heaped?
Yeah. You need about 50 grams. So a heaped is about 10 grams.
Feels like a lot.
No, it's.
But you leave it for how long?
4 minutes.
Right.
And not boiling water. Turn
the
the kettle off just before it hits boiling.
Right.
Otherwise you'll burn it. 5. That's the one thing, actually. I will say, come on, coffee roasters. You guys that are listening to this, put how to make the coffee on the damn bags because people just don't know.
No idea.
Yeah, it's hard.
Second one, I've got no confidence with the AeroPress.
No, me too. And I think that's a wrist thing.
Is it?
I think it's so hard to push it through.
There's this cool co-working space, Platform 9 that I work from in Hove sometimes down in Brighton. And they've got a couple of those and you see these cool kids like
pushing it through.
And I'm just like going to the filter machine like
listen, I'm not an AeroPress fan, but then I'm not an espresso fan either. So
do you know the history of AeroPress?
I don't actually. You're going to educate me.
Yeah, do you
educate the coffee queen. Yeah, go on.
It was the guy that invented the Aerobie.
The
frisbee.
Oh, really? How funny.
Get that?
Wow, that is interesting.
Pub fact.
Gosh.
Pub fact.
Listen, I think it's fascinating. I think it's fantastic. And if you love an espresso, crikey, who wouldn't want to have an espresso for 20 quid instead of 200 at home? Absolutely.
An espresso?
Because it produces an espresso-like beverage because it's pushing it's pushing the coffee the water through the coffee at high speed and at high pressure. That's exactly what espresso is. Yeah.
Is that how much an espresso is? 200 quid?
Well, an espresso machine.
Is it?
Well, if you think, it can be, unless you get a dodgy one on Hookie from eBay.
I'm just
back of a lorry.
My face.
Yeah. Maybe you can get
25.
Them. Yeah, that's just it. Pod machines are more affordable.
Yeah.
There aren't. I don't know of any. I think I looked for a friend, and there was an espresso machine that was 90 quid, but it was crap, and it will break in like 5 minutes. If you want one that isn't going to fall apart, you need a Sage or a decent one. Yeah. And they are quite expensive. Whereas an AeroPress is 20 quid and you're getting the same coffee without all the plumbing, without all having to clean the blimmin', everything, every single. Yeah, you've just got to do the filters. But I'm a French press or a Chemex girl personally. Chemex is the best, cleanest way of drinking coffee, and a French press is closest to how a roaster cups coffee in terms of the water sitting in the coffee and cupping from that. Again, I've forgotten I'm on a podcast and I've just done the cupping symbol with my hands. But
right. So, any other advice for coffee lovers at home? What other kit would you need, like grinders?
Oh,
and
I
all
mean,
these things?
look, grinder definitely. And if you're going to get a grinder, get a decent. Don't get a buzz grinder. Get a burr grinder that has the number of cups dial on it and the coarseness. Because the other thing about drinking coffee that people don't necessarily realise is that how you grind your coffee is different for different types of beverages. So an espresso needs a very fine grind of coffee, whereas a French press needs fairly coarse. And then you've got Chemex, which is sort of medium to coarse and so on. So a grinder, because when you get ground coffee, it's kind of... it isn't really ground for anything it can't be ground for espresso and for a French press cafetiere because the two are two different things. So you've got this kind of ground coffee that doesn't really work anywhere. So absolutely get and invest in a grinder. In fact, invest more in the grinder than you do in the machinery that makes the coffee. You know, get a Chemex for 50 quid, but spend 100 quid on the grinder because it will see you through.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've got my I can't remember the name of my grinder, but it is a burr grinder, and it was about 100. You can get more expensive ones, but at the time I got a £100 one, and it's lasted me for ages and
I
ages.
actually bought a second-hand burr grinder.
Oh wow, there you go. Yeah,
and it was 40,
you
50
do need
quid.
to keep it clean as well. That's the other thing. That's the only other problem because it gets a lot of oil in it.
Hardly used.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Bargain.
Yeah.
It's like a Krups one of these.
Oh yeah, Krups or Kenwood, or I mean, there's lots out there that are made by very reasonable home kitchenware
decent
manufacturers for sure.
So last couple of questions. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Favourite coffee shop?
Oh gosh. You see, I get into trouble now because I know so many cool people that if I say the wrong one, somebody's going to get upset with me. I have several.
Okay.
I love Gentleman Baristas.
I like their social media
there's
stuff.
there's one just down in the Business Design Centre on Store Street.
Yeah.
Not Business Design Centre. What's it called? Sorry, guys, I can't remember where you are. It's just opposite Good Street, one of those little corner roads, Store Street. Okay. And there's one obviously in Borough Market now, and there's one on Union Street. It sounds like I work for them, but they I tell you what I like about the GBs, apart from the fact that I've known Henry probably as long as I've known you. They know their coffee really, really well. They roast their own coffee, and the coffee they roast tastes just phenomenal. In fact, when I was talking about learning about coffee, when you smell coffee, most people will say that smells like coffee. But when you kind of have your palate trained in the way I have, you can smell and taste all the different nuances, like the fruits and the nuts and the chocolate and all these different things. And my husband, Mr. Anya, Pete, he'd never had that experience. As much as he drinks coffee with me, he still didn't quite get the nuances. And I took him to the GBs, years ago, and they did me a Chemex of Kenyan AA. And he, before I got to smelt it and went, wow, that smells like strawberry Ribena. And it really did. And it was just delicious. And the taste was fantastic. And it was really fruity and perfect. And they just really deliver over and over again. I was always a fan of Timber Yard before it was sold to Department of Coffee and Social Affairs. Again, it's a personal thing. I love the owners are great, and the personal kind of touches they put in that store, in both the 4 and then 3 and then 2 and now 1, just fantastic. I'm going to stick with those two. I'm sorry, everybody else. I do love all your coffee shops, but if I had to, go to one and no others, it would be one of those. Well, it would be GB's now, because Timber Yard is, it's not quite the same anymore. Yeah.
And then the last thing is the future.
The future. Okay, so this is where all of you patient people that have been listening right to the very bitter end gets the little nugget of the next wave. This should be no surprise, actually, because I think what's happening already is a real technological kind of change across. I mean, listen, we're living in an era where AI is being talked about left, right and centre, where you've got VR everywhere. We've had augmented reality with Pokemons in coffee shops. You've got, wireless charging coming into various different coffee shops. You've got pay and go, pay and order. But I think what's going to be happening more and more and more is that technology will become central to the coffee shop operation itself. And that is, already there are some very big names out there working very, very hard at automation in favour of delivering specialty graded coffee consistently well. And what's really interesting about that is that people are then saying, oh, well, it means the barista is dead. I don't believe the barista is ever going to be dead. And there's lots of reasons for this. I'll try and touch on two of them. The first one is, without the barista understanding how the machine works, the machine will never work, basically. Now, that sounds like a strange thing to say, but it isn't just a case of pressing the button and out comes the coffee. You have to make sure it's dialed in correctly. You have to make sure that they're going to be quite, especially to begin with, these machines, I anticipate being actually quite high tech in that they'll need a lot of support and technical know-how on cleaning, on maintaining, and all of those things. But the other more important thing about the barista is you can't have an experience without a person. And if you take that person away from having to tap and grind and, put it into the group head and, focusing on all of that, suddenly they're free to talk about the coffee.
Yeah.
And that's what will move us forwards in terms of becoming a nation of real connoisseurs of coffee, is learning about it from baristas while they push a button. And it's fine for them to push a button. It's not a no-go. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't. And in fact, it will guarantee consistency. It will guarantee the quality. And it will actually allow these people who are serving the coffee to really become even more passionate about it, because they'll be able to share what they know about coffee. And I think that's going to be quite critical. So the sixth wave is, it's on its way. There's already an automated coffee shop in San Francisco called Café X, which is entirely run by robots. I'm not entirely sure that we're ready for that yet. And I think that's more of a tourist attraction. But watch this space. There are things that I can't even talk about that I know that are happening out there that are very much technologically based. I know. Oh. I'm going to have to flash my little red light in a minute. But it's very exciting, and it will really change how the market is shaped, which is always good, because then it means others will grow and follow. So, this little blip in the high street at the moment is a blip, and, things can only get better, as a very famous band once said.
With Mr. Brian Cox.
Yes,
Professor
Mr. Shiny.
Brian Cox,
Sorry, Professor Brian Cox, if you listen to this.
Well, I think that's a nice note to leave on, which is the moment this whole thing becomes transactional rather than emotional, it will be a super sad day. Yeah,
and I don't think it ever will be. And I think, really importantly, don't be fearful of the automation, because the automation won't make it transactional. It'll actually open, if you think about it in the right way. Some might become transactional because, Greg's, McDonald's, they're never going to have that engagement level. But the ones that do it right will really benefit from, the new sixth wave when it really hits home. So,
it'll enhance human connection.
Exactly. Use technology for the good things.
Which was a good thing.
Yes.
Well,
happy days.
Listen, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an amazing pleasure to spend time with you. It's been a long time coming.
I know.
I'm sorry I cancelled a few times.
Don't worry.
And then I'm just about to go on a call, and it's a real dead spot at this BT.
Crikey.
Ironically, at the BT Tower. So anyway, but listen, thanks so much.
Thank you
We'll
for having
get this
me.
up soon, and I hope everyone enjoys it.
I hope everyone enjoys it too, and feel free to get in touch with me if you ever need any other advice.
We'll put those details.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Anya.
Thank you.
So there you have it. Coffee Royalty speaks on the Spectacular Marketing Podcast. Some great insight from Anya Marco, some real fun comments about the coffee industry, and I was so pleased to figure out what her favourite coffee shop was. I managed to get that out of her, which was really exciting. So thanks to Anya for doing that. Newfound respect as well for her, hearing everything about her history and her background, which I didn't know lots of, so thanks for sharing that. Also, a massive thanks to everyone who has listened, rated, reviewed, subscribed, wrote to us, and also told one friend about the Spectacular Marketing Podcast. So thanks so much for doing that. It means a great deal to all of us. And lastly, thanks so much to Gabby, Gaz and Mihal for everything that they do for putting together the Spectacular Marketing podcast every single week. I'm Mark McCulloch, and this was spectacular.